which I forgot to do at the beginning. So sadly, we missed your lovely
Oh,
presentation.
I can share
Um,
the presentation later, no problem.
okay, great. That would be great. Does anybody have any questions for Andy? No? Well, thank you. I extra like how you have some pictures of the talent show. It's always cute to see a kid in a banana costume. Um, Very awesome. So thank you for all you're doing. Next up, we have our speakers for tonight. So tonight we have Dr. Page standing in for Dr. Kay Wyatt to give the superintendent office updates. And then we have Ms. Danae Scott, who is the director of K-12 school counseling. And then we will have Dr. Michelle Reif, our school board chair, with her updates. So I will turn it over to Dr. Page.
Thanks so much, Katie. And I do have a couple slides that I want to share. Thank
Yes,
you.
please.
Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see your faces on this Wednesday. I will say, I know it was mentioned about the cold and a little bit of that, but from a silver lining perspective, at least for me, we are not buried under 12 inches of snow as they were predicting last week. And I know there are people out there who may be disappointed. I'm more of a one snow a season person. Like I can deal with one. That's fun. The kids can go sledding, do the fun things. And then I am quickly reminded that it, in fact, takes 2 hours to get out into snow with children. You get to play for about an hour before people are falling apart. And then it's about another 45 minutes of recovery once you return back indoors. So that is a great thing. I know, and we will talk a little bit about this in the presentation. For those of you who have all the ACPS notifications and buzzing things, you got buzzed during the Brooks showcase in terms of potential for tomorrow morning. So do keep an eye out for that and updates by 5:30 as it relates to any future inclement weather and needs for adjustment. So I am going to share my screen. I just have a couple slides that Dr. K. Wyatt wanted to make sure I went over with you all. She again is remiss to not be able to join this evening. She is with our redistricting advisory committee, which is having their meeting this evening from 6 to 7:30. So we'll have a little information in the slides about that in terms of upcoming dates, et cetera. So you all kind of know that information and also where to go for more information. So let me share my screen. Share. Okay, so we are going to go over just a couple topics. We have academic advisement. We have some general updates. I'll talk a little bit about strategic planning, where we are with that process, as well as redistricting. We know, I think Katie made mention of this earlier, budget season. So give an update in terms of just where we are with the budget and some other things that are coming up in the near future and kind of what's happening on the horizon in terms of work that's starting out. So specific to academic advisement, wanted to make sure that we were hitting on changes for the upcoming school year. So as we think about academic advisement, first couple bullets are talking about things that have happened to date. We have a schedule change deadline of May 30th. So be sure you're aware of that. And then again, targeting final schedules being released during the second week in August. So kind of wrapping that entirety of that process up by the second week in August. As it relates to the master schedule, kind of overall, and I don't know how many of you, probably none of you, but master scheduling is like the greatest of all Rubik's cubes and puzzle pieces fitting together. So it's important that you develop some central guiding principles as you develop a master schedule. And so for this year, one of those is very much focused on being able to develop a master schedule that will reduce student transitions at the high school level. So in order to do that, work that's being done is assessing where specific courses are located, how teacher assignment locations are impacting potential student transitions and any moves that can be made there to lessen student transitions, looking at academy caps and implementing those to reduce class sizes, and then also let me see here. Sorry, just a little box popped up. Students only being allowed to change their academy one time during the course of that process in terms of their high school career. Again, all of those focused on bringing some additional stability into the Academy's model as we go into our second year of implementation under that model, and using some of the lessons learned from the first year to just continue to refine, improve, and move that work forward. In terms of the strategic plan, um, for those of you who don't know, we are going through the process of drafting our next strategic plan, which will guide our work over the course of the next 5 years as an organization. So we started that work all the way back in June of 2024, and kind of have chunked it out across 4 phases, which you can see in the slide here. Our current phase, we're kind of straddling right now, phase 2 and phase 3. So we're moving out of some of the initial designing phase and seeking feedback on some of those initial design ideas, and moving into more refinement of the draft plan. And then with that refinements kind of reaching more of a final drafty stage, starting to continue to kind of flesh out the plan, right? So if we're feeling good about some of the bones and things that we've developed and revised, then we're going to really start digging in with staff in terms of some of the discrete plans that will need to go along with the strategic plan. And then ultimately, we are pointed towards adoption in May by the school board, and then we will be shifting very quickly into implementation as we point into next year. So just to give you all a little flavor of the current draft plan. And so all of these things, I'm just going to say this up front. Likelihood, all of these things will change somewhat between now and the final plan, right? This is intended to be an iterative process where we're collecting feedback along the way, going through revisions. We have a strategic plan committee that is leading this work, that's comprised of parents, staff, students who are giving us feedback. We also have done recently, over the past month or so, we've pushed out and done over 20 focus groups with stakeholders seeking input and feedback around these goal areas. And we did a feedback form online seeking input and feedback. So we kind of have got all that input and feedback, and now we're taking that back and kind of synthesizing that. And then we're bringing next week to the strategic plan committee some proposed changes based off of that feedback to what you're seeing here, right? This is what you're seeing here is pre-change. This is what we were collecting feedback on. So we've identified in this draft 4 goal areas. They center around the first goal, which is largely kind of our academic goal in terms of engaging and challenging every student every day. We have a goal specific to, we want to make sure we have the best and brightest in front of our students and that they're supported. So how are we hiring and then also holding on to a diverse and talented team? We are wanting to make sure that our culture and climate is conducive to learning for our students and our staff. So cultivating a safe, caring, and inclusive culture. And that last but not least, communicate, communicate, communicate. And how are we engaging with our community in the work that we do? And that is always an area, right, where there is room for consistent feedback loops and thinking about how we do that better. The other thing, so you kind of, those are the 4 goals, but then kind of we're also thinking about what are the necessary conditions to really have these goals kind of bear meaningful fruit, right? So if we're planting these seeds, what soil do we need to support the growth of those seeds over the course of 5 years? So that's where you see kind of the supporting, or what we're calling right now, necessary internal conditions that we know we also need to focus on to have these goals really come to life. So that's where you'll see things like collaboration and mutual accountability, focusing in on our efficiency and our operations, paying attention to AI and emergent technologies and addressing those pieces, and also how we're allocating resources. So that is, I would say, a 5-cent tour of kind of at the high level where we are. And again, that draft strategic plan, I say all of that with the caveat that all of this will likely change, right, by next week, by the time we're bringing it back to the strategic plan committee for their feedback based on the feedback we've gotten. But I did want to give you all just an overview around kind of where this work is headed from here until ultimately what we're targeting for adoption in May. The other big topic, right, within the division is certainly on redistricting. As I mentioned earlier, that is where Dr. Kay White is this evening at a redistricting advisory committee meeting. So just wanted to give you all the information about some of the key upcoming dates around redistricting. So because we love acronyms, we can't just say the Redistricting Advisory Committee. We have to call it the RAC. So if you hear anyone talking about the RAC, that is the Redistricting Advisory Committee. Not to be confused with SEAC, which is something else. Not to be confused with any of the other acronyms, right? So we have two upcoming meetings for the RAC group, which you can see listed there. In addition to the advisory committee meetings, we also have community engagement meetings. So those are things that I know you will be hearing more about as those come up both in March and April in terms of seeking input from the broader community in terms of where the redistricting process is. And then just notes there below in terms of how to communicate and stay informed. The redistricting advisory committee members are well aware of one of their key roles and responsibilities is bringing information back to their school communities, right? We have a member and a backup member for each school community who is serving on the redistricting advisory committee. So they are, if you don't know who your person is for your school, they are listed on the redistricting website on ACPS. So that would be a great place to find that information out. But continuing to seek those folks out. And then also, certainly, all questions can always be sent to ask at ACPS. And as I mentioned, there's more information available on the website as well. Terry, shoot.
Unmute. Are they in person? Are they at a school? Are they webinars, Zooms?
You know, Terry, that is such a fantastic question. And
Thank
in
you.
our world today, it is never a guaranteed answer. So, for example, I believe the meeting tonight was targeted to be in person, but due to some of the snow and weather, then I think it transitioned to hybrid. The commitment I will make to you all is certainly making every attempt to be as inclusive as possible with these meetings.
So for the
And
community ones,
also,
you think
I was
those
just
are
gonna
going to
say,
be
go ahead, Terry.
the community engagement ones?
I don't want to speak off the cuff, so I'm not sure, but that's information that we can certainly get back to you all. And I know that they will be pushing out a lot of information in terms of kind of public outreach around those community meetings as we get closer to those dates. All right, so that is redistricting. Let me get my mouse. Other topics. So we talked about budget. We are kind of in the budget timeline, I guess, wrapping up, so to speak, the initial add delete process. So there's a work session last night in terms of add deletes that board members had proposed, and then that is slated for action at tomorrow night's board meeting. So please do continue to stay engaged and informed around the budget and how that process is moving forward. It is February and we're talking about snow, but we are also planning for summer school and summer learning. So that is work that I know our teaching, learning, and leadership department, as well as our other departments, have already started that work in terms of all the summer school learning opportunities that will be available. And as we talked about at the beginning of this slide deck, just continuing to plan for inclement weather. I know there was a message pushed out, I believe, last week around the upcoming board vote, also tomorrow night, in response to some of the inclement weather that we've had to date in terms of transitioning the parent-teacher conference date that was scheduled for February 28th for all schools except for Samuel Tucker, which is on a modified school calendar, which is March 21st. But for both of those dates, whenever your parent-teacher conference day was identified within your school calendar, changing that back to a in-person learning day for all schools. So schools being open on that day. So for all schools except Tucker, that would be February 28th. For Tucker, that's March 21st. And again, that is not final yet. That is up for board decision tomorrow evening. So just so you all know to kind of stay tuned and keep your eyes out for that. I'm sure we will be pushing information out as related to any actions based on the board decision tomorrow. And then last but not least, an effort close and near and dear to my heart is the Equity Climate Survey. And this is a survey that we have pushed out annually as a part of our Equity for All strategic plan. That survey gets pushed out to families, to all staff, as well as to our secondary students. And we use that information every year. One, to inform school improvement planning efforts for the coming school year. So school leadership will get into their school specific results and kind of really analyze and look at what are we hearing from our stakeholders around some of these climate topics that they were asked about. And so that's one way it's used. It's also certainly from a division perspective used for division planning. What are themes we're seeing across schools that are things we need to think about as a division to either then prioritize for action going into the coming year as part of our division improvement plan, or potentially things that we need to be thinking about as part of budget cycles, et cetera, that are coming out of that survey. So please do, as much as possible, one, for yourselves, fill the survey out. I still need to fill mine out. So if you haven't done it yet, you are in great company. And we do have a little bit of time. We will be extending that window. Actually, it was scheduled to close this Sunday. We're going to give one more week for folks, just knowing we've had, snow and illness and just all the things that everyone has been dealing with over this lovely month of February. So we want to give a little more time for folks to complete that. So please do anything you all can do to encourage that from your membership would be certainly more than welcome. And with that, we will end on certainly any questions or additional feedback can be emailed to those two addresses, superintendent@ACPS or ask@ACPS. With that, I am going to stop my share, and I see Julia has her hand up.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Page.
Yes.
I was curious about the academy cap. That's the first I've heard of. I had heard that students were going to be told they couldn't change academies more than once, but the only academy that had an application process that I knew of was the Governor's Health Science. I could be missing one, but STEM perhaps in the past. So I'm just curious how those two, the caps and not being able to change more than once, are going to be taken into consideration as students are starting their course selection process.
So I can certainly get you the specific answer on the caps and kind of what's been decided or not decided around that. So that is something we can follow up on. I do know from a value perspective, right? There is always this tension and balance in terms of we want to be sure we are honoring and providing for each and every student, an individual student, and their desires, and the need to understand that everyone cannot register for one academy, right? Like, just to put it to the extremes. So that's a tension that I think we are certainly looking to continue to work through and refine. But I think the commitment remains to do everything we can to meet the needs of the individual learners. And that can look different, right? Depending on those learners. So more concrete information to come, and I can loop that back with Katie for sure.
Thank you. That would be great. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the numbers. I think some academies have more pathways than others, or more, kind of potential pathways. So just wanted to, I'd love to hear more about that process.
Thank you, Julia.
Julia, you stole my question. So does anybody else have any other questions for Dr. Page?
I see Sue has a question in the chat.
Sue asked, when are the results for the equity survey scheduled to come out?
So those typically come out to the board prior to the end of the year. So that's like a June timeline, May, June
Okay.
in there.
And
So
if
be
you
on the
didn't-
lookout. And I will say for this group, because we always, are thinking about how we're getting better, is something we've been talking about internally is how are we from a messaging perspective doing better at connecting the dots for folks in terms of why something is now happening and linking it back to the survey results, right? Because something we want to make sure folks are feeling is that they're feeling heard in responding to this. Like if I'm going to give you 15 or 10 to 15 minutes of my time to fill out this survey, I need to understand how that is actually coming to impact. So know that that's feedback we've received very much and something we are actively thinking about and will be working on for sure.
Thank you. Um, the survey was also plugged into the chat by Dr. Reef if you are feeling the urge to do it tonight and I just want to push it for later.
Thank you, Dr. Reef.
It's okay.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Page tonight? No. No. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We always enjoy having you, and we'll have you back next month, I believe. Or
Yes, I think that is right.
I believe it's next month to talk about testing and accountability. It'll be so fun.
Yay! Confetti explode.
I get really excited about testing. I know.
Me too. Me too. It's just not always the reaction, so you kind of have to. All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you. So next we have Ms. Scott, who's again the director of K-12 counseling and 504 plans, and she has some information. And I assume you have slides to share as well.
Katie, I feel like you set me up. So I was being selfish and had 28 slides, and I did not realize I had this much time. So what I am going to suggest is maybe Dr. Reef will go with like announcements or updates I think she had, and then I can go ahead to 504. I won't do 28 slides, but I do have more than quick updates. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I think we're okay, unless Dr. Reef's in a rush. I think you're good. Okay, yeah, no, you're good.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, I do have some slides. Let me share my screen. And good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Danae Scott, Director of K-12 School Counseling. Let me just go ahead and share. Okay, so I am going to kind of go through some slides really quickly, excuse me, and try to get to the meat of it. Katie and I had spoken about Section 504 quite a few times and just providing some updated information, some refresher information about how case managers who are school counselors oversee 504 plans for students. So I have an essential question: how does Section 504 support the needs of our students? And the central office staff that oversees it is myself, Dr. Victor Martin, Mr. Michael Diggins, Dr. Marcia Jackson, and Ms. Holly Robinson. Ms. Holly Robinson is our Director of School Health Services, and sometimes we have 504 plans that are just focused on health, or we have individual healthcare plans for students, and they also have 504s. So she is part of our team when we have meetings for students who have health needs. If there is a concern about a 504 at the school level, it will then go in this order to myself, to Dr. Martin, and then to Mr. Diggins, and then Marcia Jackson. But it starts at the school building level with the principal, assistant principal, typically at the elementary level. At the secondary level, there are directors. So at the middle school level, there are 2 directors that oversee 504s. And at the high school level, there's a director or dean of students. And they make sure that the 504 adheres to the law, the implementation and compliance of the plan, so that teachers receive the plans in a timely manner and they're following the plan. They attend the 504 meetings as the administrator. And the school counselor is actually the 504 chairperson who manages and facilitates the meetings. However, 504 meetings are team decisions. So we're going to talk about a knowledgeable committee. I'm going to share that in a second. And that knowledgeable committee makes that decision. And parents, community members, whoever is at that table is part of that knowledgeable committee. And then teachers attend the 504 meetings, complete teacher reports and observations for the students. And then specialists may be invited to the meeting, maybe a hearing specialist if that's a concern, or occupational therapist or speech. So they're invited to the meeting as needed basis. And then nurses, as I mentioned, if it's a healthcare concern. The role of the school-based case managers, so they coordinate the 504 eligibility meetings. So if you have a child who has a 504, they will coordinate the meetings, the triennial meetings every 3 years. They will make sure to review the plans at the beginning of the year and collaborate and consult with the necessary parties, who would be the teachers or the administrators or specialists, as we mentioned. And they will ensure that all staff that interact with the students have the plan. So if it is the first day of school, that teacher should have the plan. If it's a new student who transferred in, they go through a transfer 504 process, but their old IEP from where they came from is used until they get an ACPS 504 plan. So they're not left without accommodations. And if a 504 plan is implemented during the middle of the year, whenever that meeting is, that 504 plan the next day starts for that student. There is no lapse. And then the monitor and implementation of the plan. So who's part of the 504 team? Parents, guardians, the student, if appropriate. We often have many high school students who participate in the meetings, not very many elementary, but we do have middle school students as well. The general education teacher and interventionist, the specialist, as I mentioned, the 504 chairperson is required, and the school administrator or designee. Sometimes a school administrator is not available to attend, and maybe this is an important meeting that needs to be had at that time. So they will designate the 504 chairperson as also the school administrator. Sometimes the school administrator is absolutely needed, and the case manager will work with you to schedule that meeting with the administrator to make sure that they're there. Compliance procedures. I'm not going to read through all of this, but the important thing is that the schools must make reasonable and appropriate accommodations to eliminate barriers to students participating in school and school-related activities. They have to ensure that the meetings convene annually and then triennially to determine the need for the 504 eligibility. So the 504 just doesn't go on year to year to year. At that third year, there's a meeting to determine if that student still needs a 504 plan. And at that third year, all of the data is reviewed again. Parents are entitled to a copy of the parental rights and procedural safeguards at every meeting. So if you had a meeting today and then you needed to reconvene next week, you are offered your procedural safeguards and parental rights again. Now you can say I already have them. I have 5 copies from every meeting. I don't need any more, which is fine, but you need to be offered a copy of your rights. Overview, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Important to know here is that school districts provide a free, appropriate public education to qualified students who have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Like I mentioned, substantially limiting one or more major life activity. The student with a disability is regarded as having a physical or mental impairment, has record of it, or is regarded as having an impairment. So let's say a student has a heart condition, right? And they're not able to do as much in the gym class, right? So they can get a 504 because that's a regarded impairment. We know that this is impacting them and their ability to perform in gym. Right. So that would be something that we would provide a 504 for, and maybe they would get accommodations in the gym class, or they run and then they take a break. But that is something that we would address. And it guarantees students with disabilities an equal educational opportunity and reduces the impact of the impairment to level the playing field. So how does it start, right? The process starts with the referral. The referral can come from school personnel, a family member. If you have taken your child to a medical professional and they've talked about some screenings that they've done and maybe a 504 is necessary or they feel like it's necessary and you agree, a referral is completed. So within 15 school days, a records review eligibility meeting is held. So it's convened to review the student records, and the purpose of that is to determine whether a student has a disability that substantially limits one or more major life activity. Very important, having a disability or medical diagnosis doesn't automatically make a student eligible for a 504 plan. Okay, so if you've gone to a medical professional and they've said, yes, we believe your child would benefit from a 504, we still go through the process. We just don't take the medical documentation and say, okay, you're going to get a 504 plan. We go through this process. So you would complete a referral, and within 15 days, the records would be reviewed. So what are those records, right? So grades, we look at grades, teacher reports, staff observations, evaluations from a medical professional or outside agency, state assessments, discipline reports, attendance records, health records, medical reports. So we look at a variety of sources, not just one source. So if you've ever participated in a 504 meeting, they may pull out all of this data and talk about the data and review the data. That is important because just like I said, it is a team decision. It is focused on data, not just one data point, but all of these data points. Okay, so I know sometimes we have families come and say, oh, I had an outside evaluation. Here you go. We need to go ahead and set up a plan. We still review all of the data. Okay. So if you look at the bottom, it's the referral, the eligibility, the plan development, and the monitoring. So we're going to move to the eligibility. So we reviewed the records. We looked at all of it. And in order for us to use what we've looked at in that records review, we need parental permission. So we can review the records, but in order for us to say we're going to use this for eligibility, we need parental permission. Okay, so now we move to the eligibility, and we have a knowledgeable committee familiar with the student and issues, including, again, that 504 person, chairperson, administrator, designee, one or more of the student's teachers, parent, guardian, student, if appropriate. And then here we go, we have our psychologist, we have our nurse, occupational therapist. So other staff knowledgeable of the student's functioning and the meaning of the data. So if there's something with speech and we review that in the records review, then we would invite the speech language therapist, for example. I'm gonna try. Are you able to see this? The eligibility form, can you see that? Okay, you can? Okay, perfect. Okay, so we now use VAIEP where the documents are in a system. We didn't always have that. This is actually just our second year, a year and a half of using it. So it's pretty new. So these forms are now in the system. However, we used to use just paper forms and realize that as students are moving up, it's kind of difficult, right? We want to make sure these are confidential documents. We want to make sure they're in a place where a counselor can just look or an administrator can look and see these forms. So this is an eligibility form. If you see here, it's the type of meeting. So an initial eligibility or the 3-year that I talked about. But then these questions are asked. We talked about the data sources, right? So we would check off what data sources were used as we did the records review. I mentioned major life activities and substantially limiting, right? Prior in a previous slide deck. Well, what major life activity is substantially limited? We actually go through these and check off as a team, okay? And then we say, in what way is the major life activity substantially limited? We answer that. Then we come to an outcome. This is where things get kind of dicey, right? Because it's a committee decision. It's a committee decision. And sometimes in meetings, families feel like the counselor is making the decision or the administrator is making the decision. It is a team decision based on all of this information. So the outcome can be the committee determines the student is not disabled as defined under section 504. The committee determines that the student is disabled and the student requires an accommodation plan, a referral to the nurse. Remember, I mentioned the nurse early on. The student might need an individual health plan or a health alert, or the health plan just might need to be modified. Or the decision can be at this time, the committee determined that a disability exists. However, the student's condition does not require a section 504 plan. And we do have students with 504s with no plans. However, every year that is reviewed to see if they do need accommodations. Then at the third year, all of the data is reviewed again to determine if they still need the section 504. Excuse me. And then C, at this time, the committee determined that a disability exists. However, the student was recently found eligible for special will go through 504, but they'll go through the special education process. Okay, so those are the outcomes from the eligibility meeting. And again, it is a team determination, right? That knowledgeable committee makes that determination. Substantially limiting. Major life activity is a condition that significantly, but not necessarily severely restricts an individual's ability to perform a major life activity as compared to the ability of the average person. It's measured against their same age non-disabled peer in the general population. Okay. Then we have our major life activities, and we saw those on the form. So you talk about walking, talking, speaking, sitting, thinking, concentrating, right? The INGs, bending. What are they and what's impacted, right, in their major life activity? In the school setting, we consider major life activities to include, but not limited to, those activities that are necessary to access learning. Okay. Then we have our outcome. Yes, are accommodations needed, or no? And if we say no, we look at what other supports can be provided, right? Maybe through SST, maybe with the teacher, maybe with extra academic support, but we look at what else can support the student. Then we have our accommodation plan. There's enough data to determine if a plan is needed. We put the plan in place. What accommodations or services are required for the student to access his or her education is the question we ask. And then we have accommodations versus modifications. The accommodation adjusts how things are done, and then the modification changes what a student is expected to learn and demonstrate. We don't do that. Okay. We make accommodations so they can access their learning. I talked about related services. So if a student needs OT, PT, vision, hearing, speech, counseling services, transportation can all come through a 504. And those are just additional services. Julia, do you want me to answer now, or? I'm at 22, I'm almost at 28.
Thank you so much. I was actually wondering if you could reshare your slides when we had the eligibility form and then we lost the slides.
Oh, you can't see?
We can't see them. Do you mind resharing?
Oh, yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you so much. Thank you.
I can, though.
Katie can.
Yeah,
You
I'm able to see
can?
the slides.
Maybe, okay, hold on. Maybe
Okay.
it's me. I think, oh, I'm sorry. It was my fault. I got
It's
it.
okay. It's okay. 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 And then we additional related services. And it's a case by case, right? So it really is determining what the student needs and how we can support the student with the other related services. And I'd mentioned, for example, OT, PT, speech and language counseling services. We ask those providers to be at the table as part of the meeting to determine the services that they can provide and what they feel as part of the knowledgeable committee should be provided for the student. Key components of the 504 meeting, we discussed the strengths of the students, the concerns, the challenges. At initial meeting, data. So we look at all of the data. And an annual meeting. So at the beginning of the year, if you have a student with a 504, you'll get a phone call from the case manager. And they'll say, we want to review your 504. Has anything changed? Now, you might have had something done in the summer. There might have been a situation in the summer prior to the student medication might have changed. So you want to share that information with the case manager to make sure that those accommodations are still appropriate for that student. Okay, so the counselor does that or case manager does that, but that does not take the place of the annual review. So at the beginning of the year, but then you have your annual review, let's say is in February, they still have the annual review. Okay, the beginning of the year is just to discuss any changes. And then 504 and discipline. So a student, just like a student with an IEP, there has to be a consideration of the relationship between the disability and the misbehavior. So if a child is going to be suspended for longer than 10 days, there's a meeting, an MDR meeting, to determine if it was because of the disability or not. Okay, and then that determines whether the suspension stands or not. So that's very similar to a student with an IEP, but it's done the same way for a student with a 504. And that just kind of goes over that as well. And parent revocation. So if you have a child who has a current 504 and you want to revoke services, let's say they're eligible for an IEP and no longer need the accommodations for the 504 because they went into the IEP, you can revoke services. Now, let's say 3 years down the line, they no longer qualify for an IEP, but you want to revisit the 504 again, you can absolutely do that. But you're revoking services at that time while they're receiving their services through an IEP, or maybe they don't need services at all anymore. You revoke your revoke services. That doesn't mean it's forever. It doesn't have to be, and it can be, right? It just depends. But at that time, you will sign the form to revoke services. So I know some parents have contacted me after the counselor has given them a parent revocation form to say, wait a minute, what does this mean? Well, it just means at that moment, right, services aren't needed, and which is a great thing. But down the line, if services are needed again, then we'll just go through the process again. I actually am going to stop sharing for the interest of time, and I do see a hand. I do have a link for a parent input form that I will drop in the chat. If you want to share that with your school's PTA members, or if you want to fill that out for me, it really is just gathering additional information on how we can make the process very family friendly. I have heard concerns. I have heard some wonderful things, and it just depends on the school. So we want to make the process smooth and easy for families. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat and ask you to complete it. And I'm going to end there. But if you have any questions for me, I'll also put my email in the chat. Please feel free to email me. And Katie has my email as well. She can share that as well. Yes, question from me.
Oh, I was going to start by just saying thank you, Ms. Scott. And I would really love if all of the units would share the survey. And I know many of you have really great newsletters. And if you could make a point of asking your PTA communications person to put the survey in the newsletters just so we can try to reach as many parents as possible. But then Tracy from Jefferson Houston has a question.
I was curious how long the process takes to become like the determination process. So once somebody initially says, I don't know if my child is eligible for a special dispensation in the school district, like, let's kick this off. How long does that take? Is that like 2 weeks or is it like half a year?
No. Well, let me say this. It really just depends on what the data says, right? I don't know where you, okay, there you are. It really just depends on what the data says. So we have the referral, it's 15 days, we review the records, but the determination is, maybe the student needs additional data. There needs additional data, right? Or maybe the determination or the outcome is that we want to go through the MTSS process. We want additional support in the school before we move to a 504. So it really just depends on what that outcome is from that records review and eligibility. If it is determined that typically counselors have the eligibility process and 504 plan creation at the same meeting. It's a long meeting, but they like to do it together because they have all the information there. So in that case, I would say maybe 2 to 3 weeks. If it's, plain and simple, it's determined that the student has a disability that needs a 504 accommodation plan, then it's about 2 to 3 weeks. It will not take half a year unless we're revisiting some things.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I don't see any other questions, but thank you so much for having me. Yep, you have a question?
Actually, I have a little question,
Yeah.
which I'm going to ask, and you might not have an answer, but is there currently 17 states suing to remove 504s from being allowed? Do you have any knowledge if we have to worry about that in Virginia yet, or?
I have not gotten any information from my chief or executive director around that. I'm continuing 504s. We have not stopped providing support for our students who may need a 504. So that's where we are. I haven't gotten any directive to do anything different from my chief.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for Ms. Scott? No? Okay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to drop the link in the chat.
Thank you. Next we have Dr. Reith from the school board.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well and staying warm. It's pretty chilly outside this evening. Just a few updates, and Mr. Page, or Dr. Page rather, he covered a lot of things that I was going to mention. But so tomorrow night we have our school board meeting. We're planning to adopt the combined funds budget, the proposed budget that we will be sending to City Council. And I can talk about our add delete session in a minute. I hope you all checked out the budget book this year because it's online, it's more interactive this year. In the past, it's just been like a big PDF. So we're moving, into a more modern presentation of the budget. So you can check that out and you can look at your school's data. There's a lot of information about ACPS in the budget book that's really interesting. Some other topics that we have tomorrow night on our meeting are we're going to get a school safety data report, an update on the student code of conduct and some discipline data. And then, of course, you probably saw the message that came out from ACPS about the proposal to make February 28th a school day. So we're going to be discussing and making a decision on that. As far as our add delete session yesterday, we did make a couple adjustments to the budget. Now, I'll just start by saying that there's a lot of economic uncertainty. So that's definitely something that we were having some conversation about. It's really, it's very uncertain right now, what the future is going to hold. So we're going to, I know, continue to monitor how that's looking in the months to come. And just as a reminder, we adopt a proposed budget and then we kind of send that to City Council. They go through their whole process. And by the end of May, they adopt their final budget. And then if there's a difference, then, and also if we get any updated information from the state, then the school board at that point goes through sort of another iteration in the May-June timeframe, and we would make any adjustments at that time that we need to make. So some smaller items that we did add were to increase the retiree healthcare supplement by 20%. So we have about 620 retirees who receive this healthcare, retiree healthcare, and they saw a huge jump in their premium this past year, like unexpected, very large, 76% increase in their healthcare premium. So we wanted to kind of help out with that. We also proposed paying ACPS retirees, we have two, when we use substitute teachers, we have a daily rate, and then we have what's called a long-term rate for people who sub for a longer period of time. And so as an incentive to try to bring retirees back to being substitutes, we propose paying them the long-term substitute rate. So that was also a small add that we did, and those were offset by a proposed delete that passed of removing there was a proposal in the superintendent's budget to add 2 in-school suspension coordinators at the K-8 schools. And so we kind of talked about just that position and what it would do, and it sounded a little bit more like a support position. That was the intention. And so we talked about maybe looking at how what we're calling that position and what kind of the expectation is for that role. So so that was something that we took out. So those were the small things. One other thing we did support was adding a 1% market rate adjustment for a staff salary increase, which is a pretty significant add. And we, one of the things we talked about is right now the state legislature is going through their budget process, and both the House and the Senate have put more funding for public education in their budget bills. And they're both very close, and sometimes they're very different, the House and the Senate, and they have to reconcile them, but they're very close. And so it's looking like that bill is going to have a lot more funding for public education. The question is, like, will the governor try to veto it? If that would happen, my understanding is it's not he can't sort of line item veto things. He has to veto a whole block, which is the direct aid to public schools block. And if that would happen, then it reverts to sort of year 2 of the budget that was adopted last year, which would be not good for ACPS. So we're just kind of following that. But we did put forward that 1% MRA for staff. So we're going to be, watching that to see how that, unfolds. But we do have a joint budget meeting coming up with City Council on Wednesday, March 5th at 6 p.m. So that is coming up. And then I also wanted to share that I think I spoke about this last time, but we have a legislative agenda that we adopt for the school board. And I wanted you all to know that Senator Eben and Delegate Herring both have put forward bills to help us with the, you remember, with the solar panels that we're trying to put on at Douglas MacArthur, Minnie Howard, and the Dominion was charging a big connection fee for that. They've both put in bills where they're trying to kind of help with that. One is like through setting up a state grant in the interim while they try to figure out how to kind of change the way that fee is passed on to users. It's kind of complicated, but just to say that they're trying to help us out with that. So we're optimistic to get some movement on that. The other thing is, I don't know if everybody knows that in addition to, we typically with City Council, the school board has a joint meeting in the fall where we talk about the capital budget, and then in the spring where we talk about the operating budget. We also have what's called the City Council School Board Subcommittee meeting, which is it's attended by the school board chair and vice chair, as well as the mayor, and then one other member of council, which right now it's Councilman John Chapman. The city manager, the superintendent are there, and historically it's been, so it's always the 4th Monday of the month at 5 p.m. And it's been like a lot of just kind of reporting and updates on different things. But, Mayor Gaskins, we've kind of talked about trying to shift it into being a little bit more of a kind of like a working meeting to try to talk through different priorities, shared priorities that we have. So you all may know we went to, at the beginning of the year, they had a big city council retreat, which they do every time there's like a new group of city council members to set their priorities for the year. And we had a session with the school board. We did some activity to identify some shared priorities, and the things that rose to the top were long range planning, facilities planning, youth mental wellness, and youth employment. And then you may have also seen, or I don't know if we talked about this in the past, that there was there's an interest in City Council to kind of talk about, school transportation and Dash transportation and how, you know, high school students might be able to utilize Dash more than they are now. So we, when we had our first subcommittee meeting in January, we, you know, we kind of talked through some of those issues. And the first one that they wanted to focus on is transportation. And so we're kind of the next couple of months, we're going to be talking about transportation. So if you're interested in that topic, I encourage you to tune in. But so the next meeting is Monday, this coming Monday at 5 p.m. It's recorded just like all of our other meetings and posted just like all of the meetings. And I know we have Dr. Hart is going to be giving an overview about the ACPS transportation system, and we have Josh Baker, who heads the Dash system. He's going to be presenting about Dash, so you might want to tune into that. And then another thing is, I know I heard Katie say that she loves testing and accountability. So you might be interested to know that we also have a school board work session next Thursday, February 27th, where we're going to be discussing our academic data, our data digest that Dr. Page puts together, and we're going to be talking about the new accountability system that we're kind of seeing still. I'm pretty sure it's going to get implemented next year, but there is something in the budget that the legislature has something in there about trying to delay it for a year, but I doubt that's going to probably go through, but we'll see kind of how that plays out. So stay tuned for that. And if you don't know this, if you go into board docs and you are checking out the board meeting agendas, something that I had implemented quite some time ago with the chair's report is a list of like upcoming meetings, and it lists all the committees, like all these redistricting, there's a lot of meetings going on, and I know it's kind of hard to keep up with everything, but if you go in there, you can see that every board meeting, the clerks create a slide and it has all the lists of upcoming meetings between now and the next board meeting. So just wanted to let you know that it might be something you want to put in your PTA newsletters. I think it's a good source of information. And also, one last meeting I'll tell you all about is the George Mason Modernization Project has a community meeting to just provide an update coming up on Monday, March 3rd at 6:30 p.m. So I think that's everything. Definitely, please tell people about redistricting. I was watching the meeting tonight before I jumped on. I think people will find that meeting really interesting. It's going to be recorded, it'll be posted. So just really want to engage people because we're supposed to be voting on these new boundaries by the end of this school year. Even though we're going to take a year to like make sure everybody knows that this is coming. But you know, I know that this is always, from what I've heard, haven't been through it myself, but it's always like a really hot topic whenever you're making any change, even the smallest of changes, like really people have strong opinions about it. So just want to make sure everybody knows that this process is going on. And with that, I'll just say thank you for everything you're doing to support our schools, because that's the heart of our school system. So thank you. And I see some hands.
There are some hands. There's a question in the chat first. I was going to start with that one. The
Okay.
question is there a backup date for February 28th? I assume that's like if we make that a school day and then there's a snow day.
Is there a backup date?
That one.
Probably for the parent-teacher conferences.
Oh,
I don't know. I think we'll probably be asking that question at the meeting tomorrow night. I'm sure we're going to get into that during our discussion. I have not heard of a backup date, but I'm sure we will be discussing that.
Is there if I jump in, because mine is about snow days and this teacher conference thing.
Okay.
Is that what you are talking about, Sue? Because technically your hand is up before me, at least on my screen. I just wanted to ask, is there a clear place where it says how many snow days? I heard that they've transitioned over to hours, that there needs to be a certain number of hours of academic time in person. But there's just, when I was looking on the page, the only guidance is from last year, and it says that you have 5 snow days from last year.
There's a, we do have a policy. I'll share it with you.
Thank you.
What I can say is that there's both the Virginia code and there's something called the administrative code, which is kind of like the regulation for the Virginia code. So
It's really nuanced when you dig into it. And so with all the snow days, and we added the Virginia Literacy Act, we added some professional days for that. So we're just trying to make sure that we are, getting the proper amount of instructional time that we need. But I think that, Dr. K. Wyatt will be talking more about that. And I'm sure like the questions that community members are asking, board members will be asking tomorrow evening.
They want to make a very clear decree somewhere on the website. So when I Google a CPS snow day policy, last
Yeah.
year's stuff doesn't come up.
Yeah,
And
understood.
just so that we aren't, it's fine with our family, but I know there are a lot of families. And just to advocate, there's a teacher, what's one of my friends, she teaches over at Patrick Henry, and she's got 22 parent-teacher conferences set up for her 22 kids. She has one set up for every kid. And canceling that now means that she's not going to get to have this contact with her parents that is really critical for these kids. So I will just put a quick advocate out for canceling parent-teacher conference days. May not be as big of a deal for the high school, but it is a pretty big deal for some of those other schools.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that feedback. I appreciate hearing that.
But I'd still love the policy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll put it in the chat as soon as we're done, because I got to look it up, but I can find it easily. Suzanne, did you want to go?
Thank you. Thanks for the information on the budget. I just had a question. We got an alert on Friday about the Title IX and the possible investigation. Would that affect any funding at ACPS, or we don't have any idea yet?
We don't know yet. I'll just say that, we do receive about $21 million in federal funding, mostly through grants that support IDEA, students with disabilities, as well as Title I funding. And so, we're seeing a lot of, you may read about something else. There was this Dear Colleague letter that went out to lots of school divisions across the United States, including we got one basically from the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education, saying if you have any DEI practices that are discriminating against, white or Asian students, that they're going to be, coming in, looking and investigating that in the future. So, I don't know what the future holds. I mean, we're definitely, I think there's likely to be like a lot of lawsuits just generally by a lot of different groups if some of that stuff does occur, challenging it. So I'm not, I just really don't know. It's really uncertain sort of what's going to happen with that. So we're just kind of waiting.
I guess that being said, for the budget, like if we're trying to advocate for things like, I'm thinking along the lines of the family engagement and partnership, community partnership office, and positions like that where everything is just being cut across the board. What's the best way for us to advocate? You said they did already have the add delete. Is there another add delete, or what's the best avenue to do that?
Yeah. So
what's left?
Yeah. So what I was saying earlier is right now we're slated to adopt the proposed budget tomorrow, and that goes to City Council, but we have to circle back in the May timeframe to revisit it based on what the actual funding is looking like, because we rely on the federal allocation, the state allocation, and the city allocation. The city allocation is the biggest. But sometimes at this point in the year, we don't know for sure where those things are exactly going to land. And so when we do know, then we circle back in the May timeframe. And if we don't have funding, we'll have to cut some things. Most likely, anything that's some of the stuff that's in the proposed budget, like we have a step increase for staff. To give all of our staff a step increase is $6.8 million. So, most likely, I'm sure we would look at some of the new things being proposed, but, I'm hopeful we're not going to have to do that. But, I think I don't think we know what the future holds. What I do know about the grants, because we talked about this at our meeting last night, is that they are like IDEA Title I, they're reimbursable. So we spend the money and then we get the reimbursement back from the federal government. So if we were to experience something, it would probably be like, we would find out we're not getting a reimbursement. So then we would, we would have to
Figure that out, yeah.
figure out what we were
But
going to do.
I mean, in general, you think showing up at the board meetings and city council meetings for things that you think that's still a worthwhile effort between now and May?
I'm not sure. I would say we're gonna have like just like we'll be having a public hearing in the May timeframe on the budget. So that's the best time to really come and advocate for. And by then we'll typically what happens is there'll be a meeting where the the adjustments to the budget are proposed by the superintendent. And then the school board goes through that process of asking questions and add deletes, but there's somewhere in there's like a public hearing specifically on the budget. So that's really the best time. That's the time that's really set aside, especially for advocacy. I mean, you can advocate at any time, but I'll definitely keep you posted through these meetings of any changes that I hear with regards to funding.
Just one last comment and then I'll stop. So today I saw that Mr. Chapman had been quoted about another high school in the Alexandria Times.
A middle school, I think it was.
Oh, I thought he actually was a high school.
It was another
Okay.
middle school.
So different, a new, so that's in addition to a middle school, to an additional middle school.
That's what it sounded like.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
I didn't watch the meeting yet.
I did not see that. I saw the comment about the another high school. So,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for all you're doing too. And for the 1% staff increase. That's awesome.
Tracy. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. I have to ask. So the budget item that was deleted in your session last night
Yes.
for the operating budget.
Yeah.
I think it was resource officers for the K-8 schools. Do I have that right?
It was an in-school suspension coordinator. So the
Gotcha.
person was basically what they said is right now the dean, I think, is when there are students who are in-school suspension, it's like who's kind of like monitoring that.
Mhm.
And and they said, and the rationale was like the deans are handling that, and sometimes it's taking them away from other things when they have to do that. And so I think we were asking a little bit like sort of some data on how many kids are in school suspension. If you look at the presentation tomorrow night, some of that is in the presentation. So it seems to be like a low number of students across the division. So we're trying to get a better understanding of like, is that just like more about the position? And again, it's called in-school suspension coordinator, but when it was being described, it was like we want them to do restorative practices and all of this. And so it's like, I think the board just had questions about like, how are we identifying this position? What are the expectations in terms of the requirements for the individual? Like what is the background or experience that they have for the position? So I think we talked about like how we can revisit that job and make it more in line with what we are hoping that it will be, which is more of a student support kind of position. That was how the discussion went.
Do those roles exist in the other middle schools?
They do exist. They do have, yes, they have one at GW and Francis Hammond. And so just by comparison, both of those schools have about 1,500 kids, and like JH has 150, Patrick Henry a little over 200 middle school students. So, we don't have them at the elementary schools though. So we're just trying to understand better, like those proposed positions, how they're going to be used, how many students they're serving. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I don't see any other hands.
Michelle, I had a question, Kat.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I imagine there's going to be a lot of money spent on legal cases, bills, as you implied. Where would that funding come from? I guess I don't really understand where that is now in the budget, and would you be
Sure.
having to increase that line item for next year?
We have, well, we recently, a couple years, like in the last year or two, we got an permanent staff attorney for the school system. We used to just use a contracted attorney. So having an attorney on staff has been incredibly helpful to the school system. But we do have some funding that's available for outside counsel when we need it. But we also have an insurance program that pays for a number of like cases like this that we have to use. It's like an insurance for legal representation for different cases. So that's another source that we have. So, but honestly, I mean, just, since you mentioned that, that was a question I kind of asked when we were adding a staff attorney. And this is kind of the state of public education today, honestly, across the whole country, that things like legal fees, cybersecurity, like there's all these things today that, school divisions are dealing with that we're having to, unfortunately spend more and more resources for. So, yeah.
That was helpful.
And then just, I mean, there is some collaboration regionally too with the attorneys. So some issues.
Thanks.
Yep.
I have a really quick question about subs. Do we employ like permanent subs that like almost, especially some of our larger buildings, you need at least one sub every day, right?
Yeah.
We employ like a
We've
person
talked about that. I don't think we have. I mean, we definitely have people who are probably really regular, but as far as like making it a permanent position, I think what we have, I'm trying to remember. We've definitely talked about this in the past. I don't think we have that role, because if we could get someone who would be a permanent sub, I think, as I recall, if I'm trying to pull this conversation out of my memory, then we would just want them to be a permanent teacher in a classroom. So yeah, but I think we have people who, sub quite regularly. And one of the incentives that we've put in last year, and I think to continue this year, is people who, like, it's an incentive for if you sub like a certain higher number of days per month or every 2 months or something, then there's like an incentive pay that's associated with that to try to encourage people to pick up more days, people who are in the substitute pool to pick up more days. So we're doing things like that as well. Yeah.
Does anyone else have questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much for all your updates.
Yep. Thank you.
And we will move on to hopefully a speedy part of PTA business. If Meta, if you could load the slides back up, please. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, a couple of really, really quick reviews. One, I've already asked you if you signed in late. I'm reminding you again, please form a nominating committee. It's a good plan. It'll give you plenty of time to find some people to help you for next year. While you're forming that nominating committee, you might want to think whether you need to make any bylaw amendments before your election. I know there's at least one unit that is currently changing their terms from 2-year terms to 1-year terms. You need to vote on that as a membership before you do that, and you need to do that ideally before you do an election. So please think about that. The third thing I would really love you to start thinking about is whether you need a summer budget. I had a lot of questions last summer that were, how do I spend money this summer? My budget hasn't been passed yet. And the answer was you don't. But the way you do it is you pass a budget for the summer in May. It can't include any fundraising. It can just include what you want to spend, what you have left over in your bank account from this school year. So it would be a really good idea, just like a regular budget, you're going to need to present it to the membership and vote on it. So think about it sooner rather than later, please. And then last, Julia Burgos in the Office of Communications reached out to me this week because there's been a lot of questions about, on Parent Square, parents have to opt in to receive your PTA messages. And so they're still talking about that. There are still some legal issues about it being an opt-out instead of an opt-in. However, in the meantime, she wanted me to remind everyone that we have Peach Jar and we can post flyers on the websites for the school. And so maybe people that are going to your school website can see the PTA flyers there. And so there is a nice lady, Ms. Alvarez, in her office, and I put her email right there. And you can email your flyer with your school name and she will post it for you. And so I will be sending a message just to remind everybody, but I wanted to explain what that was for you all. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, here's my little reminder about the summer budget. And just that it can't include fundraising. We'll just keep on moving. We're gonna keep on moving. We're gonna move really fast. Okay, Cynthia had to sign out because her daughter needed to go to bed, which we understand. So she does have the financial report that we can go to in a second, but first, we are going to vote to transfer some budget funds from PTA program support to PTA support of Title I schools. It's $1,000. We want to make more money available. We are finding that a lot of units are concerned about having large gatherings right now for a variety of reasons. And so we are going to move from doing too many very large gatherings this spring as PTAC to trying to support your own individual unit gatherings. And so somebody who's better at this will remind me if I call a vote, I can just call a vote right now. And we can say, if you are your PTAC rep, so Dr. Reef, you can't vote, sorry. And anyone else who's just hanging out for fun. If you are, let's do it this way. If you are opposed to us moving that program support to support Title I schools, please say yay now. So if you are opposed to doing it, put your little thumbs up in your little screen so that Julia can see it. Or speak out loud. I see nobody opposed right now. Okay, so we can consider that passed, correct, Julia? Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the financial report. I believe she said we had another new registration for Camp Fair, so we brought in a little bit of money there. I do not believe there was any, and maybe a little bit of money with the shop to give donations, but there's no other major changes. And next slide. And then we do have the jot form fee still because we are still keeping the camp fair open because we're hoping to get a few more people to join yet. Okay, and that's all I got for finances. So as you can tell, I'm a very good treasurer. Don't ask me to be a treasurer. Anyway, next slide. Okay, Maureen, I realize that everyone before you has already hammered this kind of in. Would you like to add anything?
These are the dates. We are working on a very basic letter to City Council and I think the school board, just reaffirming the values of what we think should be funded, given how crazy everything is and chaotic and unknown. We thought just sticking to the principles and the values made sense at this time. So look for that in the coming weeks. I think Katie has done a really good job with the redistricting social media posts in the last 2 weeks. That's you, Katie, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and informing everyone about the principles that are being used to guide the process. So if you are interested in that, check out Insta and our Facebook page. posts, and Katie wanted me to let everyone know that your school units should be, aware of your representative at the redistricting committee, and, be reaching out to them with feedback. And if you don't know who your rep is, let us know. We can put you in touch with them. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Maureen. Oh, no, it's just a little, that's the page if you get interested. I think I lost Jen. Do I still have Kristen? Kristen, would you be willing? Kristen is another member of our special ed committee. Would you be willing to share about this, or would you like, I can do it if not.
No, I can, I'm happy to speak to it, Katie.
Thank you.
Yeah, so with the special education committee, all the special ed reps, we gather usually about once a month, and we've been having regular meetings with Amy Creed, who is the director of the Office of Specialized Instruction. We are also bringing in Janet Eisenstadt, who is in charge of SEAC this year. We're just really trying to streamline all of our special ed goals together to optimize all of our efforts. So the three areas that we're really focusing on are improving the Best Buddies program at the high school and hoping that that will then be able to trickle down. Right now, it's pretty limited, and they're really lacking in resources and the ability for the teacher sponsors to have enough time to devote to what is a really large club at the school. So that's something that we're working with Office of Specialized Instruction. And I believe there's a meeting coming up next week, bringing everyone together to try to start with the Best Buddies Friendship Walk in April. So if any units are interested in having a presence there, you can reach out to Jen, and we can sort of see if there might be something more that we could do there, because the problem has been that Best Buddies, the regional group, used to provide transportation, and after COVID, they stopped doing that. So all of the regional activities like the homecoming dance and the friendship walk are not attended by children with disabilities, which is kind of beside the point. Our second goal is to make sure that there is an intentional process for providing orientation for special ed students at each school. It's been a little bit per school how that happens and if it happens. And in talking to parents at all of the units, there's really that need for coming together at the beginning of the year and making sure that the needs of children with IEPs and other disabilities are really accounted for during that orientation, and they don't have to choose between going to gen ed classroom teachers and special ed teachers, and that they have special touring abilities, et cetera, depending on what their disabilities are. And then third, I don't know that this is going to happen, but every year there's a transition fair that has been really great in terms of helping families of children with IEPs and 504s who are going from elementary to middle to high, and then high school, working into getting into the community, maybe going to college, trying to get jobs, life skills, etc. And that's been a really great resource where they bring in a lot of organizations and vendors from the community, as well as hold programming where parents and students can go in and hear about what will be happening during the year, different programs, what classes are like, meet teachers, etc. And this year that's going to be moving to virtual because there have been some attendance issues. And so we're talking with OSI about that to sort of find out what have been the obstacles there, and is there any way to bring it back in person, if not this year, then next year, and how the PTAs can help in that regard. Did I miss anything, Katie?
I don't think so. Thank you so much for jumping in on the fly.
No
Kristen
worries.
speaks so much better about these issues than I do, so I really appreciate her. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have DEI with Sue.
Hi. So the first thing is we just finalized the date for the equity webinar that the Brielle Welch, the Director of Equitable Practices, so that's going to be on Thursday, the 27th. That's open to everybody. And it's at 7 p.m. It's going to be online. So if anyone outside of the committee wants to join, please let me know. The other thing is working with Brielle, there is a series of workshops that are actually posted on the website. I put the address in there. So there's like a couple of different that in terms of family engagement and equity and some other topics. So those are actually, I found those pretty good. The second thing I wanted to mention, I attended one of the another family engagement at the Institute for Educational Leadership today. That's from the National PTA. They have quite a few different also have a series of webinars on family and engagement. And today's was really good because I was able to actually talk to other PTAs across the country about family engagement strategies. And it was a lot of different topics, but it was very well run and it was very hands-on. So I highly suggest those as well. Other work we've been doing, I've been working with communities and schools, some social workers, the ACPS counselors and some other nonprofits. We have a lot of different workshops coming up on different topics. And because some of my focus is actually at the high school, it is open to across ACPS. A couple of them are culturally specific. We have an Ethiopian, Eritrean college readiness event coming up on March 5th. We also have some seminars and workshops held in Spanish. So if you want more information on those, let me know. There is a summer resource fair that's coming up. I think it was held last year as well. That's for all of ACPS. I believe it's going to be held at King Street at the high school. And that is for folks that need resources over the summer. And I think ACHS is going to be, the PTSA is going to be sponsoring that part of that. And I'm going to also reach out to PTAC and see how we want to get involved with that summer resource fair. Finally, we've also been working with a lot of local, national, and the state PTAs, community organization, and nonprofits. We're continuing to try and support our district's immigrant families. We're going to have a resource section at the high school PTSA, which is achsptsa.org. We're also sharing some things in person at networks. We're not specifically doing workshops around this, but reaching out to folks kind of one-on-one and in community and some community organizations. I could use some help on some of our West Side schools. So if anybody has any additional information on that, let me know.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks.
Next we have a really quick camp fair update, and it was published, so I hope you're looking for your camps. Sharon, anything else to add? Did we get any new
No, I think that that's it. It has been published. It will be updated about every other week as new camps come in. And I think we have about 50 camps that are in there now, and they're all really great. So you should take a look at it and share it with your PTA units.
Thank you. Sign, if you have small children, sign them up. Be great. Last, but oh, really quick, the Reflections chairs have booked March 13th at Mini Howard to celebrate our citywide Reflections winners. Details will be coming shortly, and they wanted me to let you know that the statewide winners will actually be announced tomorrow. So we'll check that out and see if we win this year. And then last, I just wanted to remind units that if you haven't already had your PTAC / superintendent meeting, or you haven't signed up, I still have some slots. There are a few of you that have not. Please share with your unit. It's a nice chance to talk to Dr. K. Wyatt, tell her what's going on at your school, any concerns, any joys. They've been going really well so far, and I appreciate all the units that have done them. And I believe that is all we have, right? Meta, is that the last? Yay, we did it. 8:39. So sorry, guys, that went a little long. Maybe we won't have school tomorrow. Check your email at 5:30 tomorrow. It reminds me of being a child. That's when we found out about snow.
You do call
And
too.
yeah, thank you all for being here. Please reach out if you have any questions. Good night.